podcast where we talk about films that were solely nominated for an Oscar in the writing categories. I'm your host, Matthew Anderson, and today we have Riley Quinn. Welcome to the show, Riley. How are you doing today?
Hey, Matthew. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's wonderful to have you on. And it was nice that right before we started, we managed to talk a little bit about the upcoming Oscars and so on and so forth. Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me because I think I'm sort of starting out, and you took a bit of a chance, but I think we'll have a great chat today.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited for this one. So before we start in our episode, like we always do, I want to just go over some traditional questions I have for whenever I have a new guest on for the show. Would you care to explain to our audience what exactly it is you do for a living?
Yeah, sure. So I work in marketing in here in Sydney, Australia. That's my main 9 to 5 job, but also have a passion for movies, and um, I'm a huge fan, and definitely, and I've followed the Oscars, I think, now for like a good, I think 12 years now, pretty passionately. So this is the kind of exciting time of year where things are ramping up, and we're getting a sense of what could happen in March. So um, yeah, movies are my hobby, but yeah, I guess marketing's my day job.
Or whenever the Oscars decide to come on, whether it's March,
Whenever,
February,
whenever they're on now,
April.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Nice, awesome. So the other question I want to ask is it's always tough to ask what your favorite film is, so I might as well ask what's your favorite genre of film?
To be honest with you, I like a good drama. I think I sort of fall into the probably category of a lot of Academy voters in that sense, and I typically do like just a good drama. And I sort of came thinking about, obviously, like we all have like so many favorite films, but um, like Ordinary People is like a huge favorite of mine. So I guess that would kind of give a sense of like what I really like in a movie. And yeah, so, and a great screenplay win. Obviously not a lone screenplay, but a great win.
Yeah, Ordinary People won picture, director, screenplay, and supporting actor for Timothy Hutton, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I actually owned that for about a year or so. I still haven't gotten around to watching it.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I I kid you not, Riley. I have so many movies in my catalog, both in my room behind me and also in the entertainment room that's at the house. I think this year I'm just gonna be like, you know what? I'm just gonna ease up on the Blu-rays for this Christmas, especially when I already got Oppenheimer just in time for 4K. So
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I've got such a backlog of movies that I literally own, but I've never gotten around to watching. So I should, yeah, I think I need to do the same thing.
well, awesome. So today we're going to be here to discuss the 2017 film Logan. That's right. We are talking about a superhero comic book movie for the first time on the show. And before we begin our little spiel or discussion on this, I just want to warn our audience that this won't be a beat by beat bulletin presentation point like you hear on other channels, but we will be discussing major spoilers for our talk. If you haven't seen Logan yet and you want to hear our full thoughts on it, watch the film and then come back to see it. I don't know why you haven't seen it unless you're just not that big of a comic book guy or superhero guy. You know, but I think this one is definitely one of the better ones out there, especially when we're now living in a world where there's a lot of superhero schlock, in my opinion, at least. So before we begin, I always want to start off with our production notes. So here we go. Due to the success of the Wolverine back in 2013, 20th Century Fox at the time wanted to discuss with James Mangold on creating another solo Wolverine film, with Hugh Jackman returning to the titular role and Laura Schuldner Donner, I think I pronounced that name right, returned to produce under the Donner's company. Near the end of 2013, however, Jackman mentioned that he's near the end of his tenure portraying the character, and that Mangold was in the process of creating ideas for his new film that they were working on together. Some of the examples the two threw out for the basis of Logan were that of The Wrestler from 2008 and Unforgiven, which was released in 1992. Out of James Mangold, out excuse me, outside of James Mangold writing the script, they also had Scott Frank, who was nominated for an Oscar for Out of Sight in the adapted screenplay category, and I believe also wrote and directed the miniseries The Queen's Gambit. And Michael Green also tagged along, who also worked on Green Lantern and Blade Runner 2049. I always still find that funny that Michael Green, whenever I bring up Michael Green's name, I'm like, yep, he also was involved with Green Lantern, which, yeah, completely yeah, times have changed for sure. Throughout the writing process, the mindset Mangold had with the writers was to make it a loose adaptation of Old Man Logan, an 8-issue storyline that was co-created by comic book writer Mark Millar. Filming lasted from May 2nd to August 13th of 2016, with post-production starting roughly around end of August. Frequent collaborator Michael McCusker co-edited the film and has worked with Mangold on every project since Walk the Line, and that also got Michael McCusker his first Academy Award nomination for film editing, and even won the comedy musical category at the American Cinema Editors Awards ceremony. The VFX company Image Engine worked on the majority of the film's visual effects, and they've also worked on various big budgeted blockbusters to Oscar caliber work such as American Sniper, Captain America: Civil War, the first Deadpool film, and The Revenant. Logan was released in the United States on March 3rd, 2017, with rave reviews, and even made around $619 million worldwide on a production budget of $127 million. We'll get to the budget budget stuff shortly, which I got a couple notes about for that. But while the film didn't score any other categories at the Academy Awards, because surprise, surprise, they're not a big fan of superhero comic book films unless you're changing the genre up a bit. It did manage to become the first live-action superhero film to be nominated for screenwriting, however, in the adapted screenplay category. It also got nominations from the Writers Guild of America and the USC Scripter Awards as well. As of this recording, James Mangold went on to direct 2 more films, Ford v Ferrari, or in international countries. I'm not sure if this is where it's titled in in Australia, Riley. Le Mans 66.
Yeah, we still had Ford versus Ferrari here. So
Oh, okay. All right.
yeah,
Well, I know. I think in like the UK, I
I
think it
think
was
the
like Le
UK it
Mans
is.
66.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe that's where it was. But so anyway, so that got nominated for Best Picture, and he also worked on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I find it so funny as we're recording this that that's now on Disney Plus. Now it's just, you know, timing.
especially when you compare it, I think, to this film, they're quite different now. Looking at them close together.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later on in the show. So as far as what the log line or plot summary of the film is, uh, it's essentially in the near future where mutants are nearly extinct. An elderly and weary Logan leads a quiet life, but when Laura, a mutant child pursued by scientists, come to him for help, he must get to her. He must get her to safety. So it's essentially a going from point A to point B kind of scenario, and that's pretty much all I had for production notes on it. I was curious before I give my general thoughts on it. Why was this for you? Because you would send me, we usually, when I ask guests to come on for my show, or if someone like you, Riley, asks, "Hey, can I come on for the show and let's talk about a movie?" And you would given me, I believe, a few films, if I'm correct in saying, to cover. Why
yeah.
was this one of them on your list?
Honestly, looking at the list that you sent across, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not a superhero movie fan, so
Okay.
didn't come to this with that kind of that I don't know what you call it, like that bias to it. But I just I think looking at the list of films, this just kind of stood out to me, and I remember at the time when it was nominated and trying to predict what would get nominated this year, because it is actually sort of an unusual lineup in the sense that it's you get the sense that while they're all really good films, the Academy had to, for me at least, they're good films. The Academy had to stretch a bit to fill in the 5 slots, which I think is always an interesting situation when you see where they have to go when they don't just have 5 Best Picture nominees who they can nominate. So I just think this stood out, and I think it probably was to me like maybe the fifth slot, and then looking at potentially what could have replaced it is interesting as well. So there's that aspect to it, and also just the fact that I remember just being pleasantly surprised by this film when I saw it in 2017, but hadn't revisited it since then. So
Oh,
to
okay.
yeah, honestly had forgotten a lot of the details and like a lot of the plot. Had forgotten that, for instance, like Richard E. Grant's in it and Stephen Merchant. I'd forgotten all of that. So it was kind of looking at it through fresh eyes, and just, I guess, the opportunity to talk about how maybe this happened, that how we did get a superhero film nominated in, I think, just in like an above the line category. I don't know if it had happened for a live action superhero film, and there haven't been many since then, and I don't think any in the screenplay category. So it just sticks out to me as sort of like a bit of it's a bit of an odd duck in many ways, although I think very worthy of its nomination as well.
I recall Heath Ledger for The Dark Knight. I think
Oh
he
yeah,
was the
yeah, true.
first comic book, like superhero
Hmm.
comic book performance to get in, even though he's playing a villain.
Yeah,
And then this was like 2 years after. I'm sorry, 2 years before. Excuse me. Joker came out, and that just took the whole
yes,
thing kind of by storm. Which is, yes, it technically is a superhero comic book kind of story because it's about Joker, who's the villain of Batman, even though Batman's not in it, except for
yeah,
well, that's a
yeah,
whole
yeah,
other spiel.
yeah.
As far as
And we
this
had
getting in,
Angela Bassett as well for Black
yep,
Panther. Yeah,
yep, and Black Panther made in for
and Black
Best
Panther the
Picture, the
picture.
first one.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, I think and I'm really glad. I want to give a shout out to Joey Magnuson. I'm not sure if you heard our
yeah.
episode discussion we
Hmm.
had for the Big Sick, but he had brought up when we were talking about Oscars, that Oscar ceremony for the Big Sick, how the adapted screenplay lineup was so barren
Hmm.
that the fact that this managed to make it in for adapted screenplay when in other years it wouldn't have done it. And I totally agree.
Hmm.
Like it was a pretty like, it was almost like, trying to find out like, what do we go for here? It was kind of like, I think it was last year, the last year's Oscars where they managed to get All Quiet on the Western Front and especially Top Gun
Yeah.
Maverick and like Glass Onion in for adapted screenplay.
I was trying to
I think
think.
all I think
I
All
was trying
Quiet was
to.
going to get in anyways, but
Yeah,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
was trying to
Sorry.
think of the last time. I was like, was this the last time that we've had a screenplay category that it feels like they really had to stretch to fill in the category? And I actually think just this past year was
Hmm.
probably the last time that it feels like they had to go out of their comfort zone a bit. And yeah, especially the Top Gun nomination. But at the same time, Top Gun did well in other categories, whereas this is a genre film that it's almost strange that it got screenplay but couldn't get into like sound editing, which we can get into later, or like a technical category, that it just got the screenplay nomination. And just to kind of, I think, go back to this year, I remember, like, I think a lot of people had were not predicting Logan. It was kind of split. Some people had it in, and some people had Wonder, that film, which came out that year, which I don't think was a great screenplay. So I think it was the right choice. But there really weren't that many. If you look at who else could have been in it, it was, as you said, a pretty barren lineup. But I guess you had Blade Runner 2049, um, and even something like
I
The
don't think that was
Beguiled.
ever going to get in. What was the other
Yeah,
one?
or like The Beguiled. I think that would have been a good choice.
Hmm.
And I remember people even like thinking like, would Wonder Woman get in? So I mean, it was a definitely a tricky category this year.
Yeah, I know we're kind of jumping the gun on this
Yeah,
because
sorry.
usually we save it for later, but that's
Yeah.
no, it's all right. I will say regards to it adapted, and we'll get into some of the other category possibilities for Logan later. But I will say for adapted with this, I still think that by having Scott Frank
Hmm.
involved, who, as I said, got nominated for Out of Sight, I think he was the reason why the film obviously is as good as it is, but also I think he was like a big name to writers themselves to be like, Scott Frank, he's a really talented writer. We like his name and therefore we want to put him in. And I think even too at the time there was one unanimous anonymous ballot, I should say, that said, this lineup is so terrible, I'm not even going to go for any of them, and I'm just going to abstain my vote. And I'm like, okay, sure, because that's clearly how you should vote at the Oscars if you're going to do that for certain categories.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah.
but if anything else, it gave it an easy win for Call Me by Your Name. You
Well,
know,
that's the thing. We got James Ivory getting an Oscar, which you can't complain about. That was pretty amazing that got to happen at some point. So
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah. So as far as my thoughts on the movie, since we jumped around all over the place, but yeah. So my thoughts on the film, I had seen it opening night with a buddy of mine, and I'm not sure if you've seen any of the previous X-Men films, Riley. But I
Yeah.
had. Go ahead.
I have a pretty spotty record, so I actually hadn't seen the Wolverine before this. So,
Okay, interesting.
um, but still could find, still didn't hinder, the experience at all.
Gotcha. So yeah, so I've seen all the other X-Men films. I'd seen even the shitty one with X-Men Origins Wolverine, which I rewatched like a year or two ago, and it still sucks. Um, but I was kind of like, it's like they're okay overall. The X-Men films. I think there's a few out there that are pretty good. I remembered really liking First Class, and Days of Future Past I thought was fun. Um, and there was a couple others. The two Deadpool films I enjoyed, and obviously this one. And to my surprise, even to my buddy, we were like, when we came out of it opening night, we're like, it was like a Thursday night screening, and we're like, yeah, it was actually pretty good. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we were. I don't think either of us were expecting it to be that good, but yeah, there we are.
And it kind of,
And
I remember seeing it and having the same response. And it early on, I think you kind of go, this is like kind of something different. Like this isn't just doing the same thing we've seen before. Um,
mhm.
but we'll get into that.
Yeah, and rewatching it this time around, like this one was a little bit of a passive watch just because I had seen it multiple times, and on top of that, I was a buddy of mine it came out of like one of the recent films this year, and we were just texting about it. I was like, I had like so many questions to ask him, and I had to make dinner, and but yeah, no, overall though, I got I was like, yeah, I was surprised, even though I have like a lot of notes, it wasn't like as extensive or as detailed as they usually are. But yeah, I enjoyed the movie overall. Personally, I think this is a solid, as we said already, it's a solid adapted screenplay nominee, and the fact that it managed to get in was even more surprising because these are the kind of films. For one, for me at least, it stood out because it wasn't just doing something that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has always had, excuse me, a bit of flack for doing, where it's just a lot of explosions, action set piece after action set piece, and here's the comedic banter here and there. And there's some comedic banter here too, but it's very much it's used appropriately enough in certain
Hmm.
scenes.
And it
And
feels
for
organic,
the
I think, as well, to the characters. It doesn't feel like it's just shoehorned in. It feels like it's
yeah,
earned.
yeah, and also too, even though James Mangold himself isn't this like stylish filmmaker like Christopher Nolan is or Guillermo del Toro, you could at least tell there's a lot of craftsmanship behind the film. And the other thing I think what he did pretty well was the fact that he, instead of making it a more like balls to the wall action movie, he made it a more grounded, grittier film. And I was reading somewhere a while back that when they did the film, Hugh Jackman had to take a severe pay cut to get this down to was it not just to get an R rating, but also get their budget down, because I guess his usual pay would have gone over budget. And they're like, nah, we can't do that. So that was pretty cool. And even just the fact that Hugh Jackman at the time was willing to be like, I will do this for however, whatever we need, just to get it to our R rating. And fans have always wanted a Wolverine movie to be rated R, because we've always
Yeah.
seen
Hmm.
the clause. Even when he did his two solo films, it's like, nah, we got to make it PG-13 because we haven't reached the point where R-rated films are within the mainstream. And I think
Yeah.
something like Deadpool and Kingsman kind of help that factor. Is like, ooh, now we can get like mainstream R-rated films back into play.
And I remember there was a
Um,
time when that was a huge discussion that we really just want to see a Wolverine film that really just goes all out, and there's so much potential to make an R-rated Wolverine film. And I think this movie really just gives the audience what they want from the very first scene. And you know that it's going to deliver in that regard from very early on.
Yeah, and I love the way it opened, because I was I one of my rewatches I did of this years ago was I rewatched it with the audio commentary. And I think Scott Frank, according to James Mangold, I'm pretty sure Scott Frank was the one who came up with that idea of him waking up, drunk, and beating the shit out of the guys and killing, like cutting the one guy's arm off and such. And it really did feel like, the whole time watching it, it felt for the most part like a Western. And much like how Clint Eastwood sort of demystified the Western genre within itself, James Mangold and his writers did that really well here, where he's demystifying the comic book superhero genre as a
Yeah.
whole. Because you're starting off with a guy who's like pissed drunk, he's swearing, he's trying to get his claws out, but not all of them are able to retract. It's like there's like half the blade comes out of one of them. And it really did remind me of almost like if you were to take this in a Western era with like Clint Eastwood in that kind of time period, it would fit almost seamlessly in that area of like, that Western thing. Even the whole, when they later on in the film, when they're trying to outrun the guys trying to chase them, and there's a train coming up, and
Yeah.
them trying to get in front of the train so that way the bad guys are there's like a split between them. And I thought that was something I still find very interesting, and I think helps ground the movie as a whole in that aspect. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I think just when the film was starting and kind of looking at Hugh Jackman and the portrayal and the version of this character we were going to get, I did think for a second I was like, was Clint Eastwood ever considered to play Wolverine at some point? Because I actually know he was suggested for Batman at one point, and I thought uh, that I'm sure it didn't happen, but I'm like, did someone at one point had to think, is there an opportunity for Clint Eastwood? Maybe not in this film, but in some capacity, probably a long time before this came out. But I could see Clint Eastwood in this version of Wolverine, playing this version of Wolverine. And I think, yeah, the Western illusions throughout are a pretty like obvious. And I think we can get into this, but there are parallels throughout, and I think quite explicitly, with featuring Shane in the film in a pretty prominent way. It's clearly like it's top of mind for Mangold and I think the screenwriters in this film.
Yeah, having Shane in the movie, and she's even quoting the film at the very end when, spoiler alert, he dies. And that was something that I was a little bit like, there's no way they're actually going to kill him off, because we've seen the same old song and dance, especially when I saw it the first time in theaters. I was like, no, he's not dead. Fuck off. He's not going to die. They're going to find some Deus Ex Machina where, they're going to have some kid who's like, oh no, I could randomly heal people. And it's like some bullshit. And then when he was like, you see his eyes, like the light leaves his eyes. And I'm like, oh, wow, they actually killed him off. So, and that was the other thing too. I think Hugh Jackman said he originally wanted to do this movie. Now it's kind of a bullshit lie, because he's in the new Deadpool film. But I recalled that I think one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to retire the character on his own by killing him off by the end, which is an a really bold idea to do, and to say goodbye to it, because we've seen a lot of franchises overstay their welcome, and characters within franchise be like, okay, we're kind of done with this. Like, let's try to wrap this up. Let's go, guys. And then Hugh Jackman at least was like, nope, I'm gonna be done with this, and then I'll move on to other things. And I mean, now it's kind of a BS lie because of
watching it now, especially when you know that it's not really the end. It's not the ending, and I think that's an issue now with superhero films in general, is that there isn't that sense of there being stakes, because you know that there's going to be some loophole where they can come back. So I think when this came out, though, it felt definitive that this is like the last time we'll see Wolverine. And also, I think the thing about it is that it feels like it's going out on a high note. I think it is in that sense of a franchise winding down, and it's just like, let's just get one more out. And it seems like it's almost at the pinnacle of what this character is, and it's also the last film. So it feels it,
Yeah.
it just was. I think everything came together in the right way for this film in every aspect.
Yeah, I still find it funny that like this is a better finale for the X-Men franchise as a whole compared to what Dark Phoenix ended up being.
And even comparing it to Indiana Jones, like if we're going to talk about Mangold,
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, I'm glad we brought up Indiana Jones because you've seen it. You've seen Indiana Jones Style of Destiny as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I for just for the sake of our audience, in case they haven't seen it, because it's going to be out on Blu-ray. Well, actually, it'll be out on Blu-ray by the time this is up. But I'll try to sort of skirt around spoilers and such. But all I will say is that I think the biggest difference between this and Dial of Destiny is I felt that with one of the main issues as to why I think Logan still works and still holds up to this day as a film is because the X-Men franchise as a whole, and even someone brought this up too, the X-Men franchise as a whole has always been able to adapt itself into a for modern audiences. Like the franchise has been out since 2000, and it's surprising that up to this point it's been able to modernize itself, not just like, oh, let's put it in the present day era, but it's been able to adjust to modern audiences standards of what they expect and what they want out of a superhero blockbuster film, and it's been able to do it pretty well enough. I know, what was it, when you watch X-Men Origins Wolverine, you watch that and you're like, yeah, it's clearly was made during the writer's strike. Days of Future Past was definitely made as part of it was kind of like a like, hey, we could actually, have our finger in the pot of the, like, Marvel Cinematic Universe that we're building up with Captain America Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy and such. uh and with this, it's very much like within that R-rated era. Like Deadpool just came out a year before this, and so on. So yeah, and that was something I think the Indiana Jones franchise for me is always, it hasn't been able to do, because it's really the biggest audience for that film is always has been and always will be the older audience. And even what was it, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull couldn't even do a good enough job to get new viewers on board. It's almost like you had to watch the others to like appreciate
Mm-hmm.
these movies, but that's his whole thing. And even just the one thing I also want to mention with the budget with this is that it's $127 million, and it's a pretty, like, not a cheap movie, but like they managed to get their costs down in terms of like what they couldn't do and what they could do. And you could clearly tell watching Logan, there's a lot of there's a fair amount of blending with the practical effects that they do on set and a lot of CG stuff that they do. Um, especially during the seizure moments that Charles has, you could tell like some of that was done in camera, or at least enough of it was done in camera. And then you see something like Dial of Destiny, which that's budgeted at like $300 million, and I'm like, where did all the money go? Was this like,
Mm.
a tax loophole for the executives to take like half the money away, or
Yeah,
did you guys actually spend $300 million on this entire production? Because I
yeah.
find it bullshit, especially when
Mm.
we're still getting stories of visual effects artists not getting their due pay, and some of these studios are even going out of business and being bankrupt because they weren't given enough pay for their work or contribution. So I don't know, like it's
Yeah, I think there's a lot of question marks around that, just in with budgets in 2023, and comparing it
yeah.
to this film especially. Yeah,
Yeah, I just don't get it. I honestly don't. And yeah, so and even like, like even like we already said too, like Logan has, you could feel that sense of like there's a bit of a genuine heart to it, to the whole
hmm
thing. And I think what also works too is that connection of Laura X-23 and Logan. um there's this sense of connection between the two of them, and they don't really start talking to each other until like halfway through the film, over halfway through I should say, after Charles is long gone. But I never really got that sense of like heart from Dial of Destiny,
yeah,
that one was trying to do. But
yeah. Well, I
yeah,
think the
but
crux, I
but
think, for me is that it feels like, I don't know if there is a superhero film that I can think of that feels as free from, I guess, studio interference as this film. In that there's no, there's, you can tell that there's no kind of, in the back of their mind there isn't anything um, about starting a new franchise,
Hmm.
or or leaving the possibility that Wolverine's alive, or it just seems like they really got to do their own thing. And I think if you look at Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, that it probably was heavily interfered with in terms of executives, and even a film like that I think people have brought up as like a good example of a kind of modern gritty superhero film, Joker, then the recent the Batman.
Yeah.
There still are those you can see dabbling in the sense that there's in the Batman there's there's Easter eggs about bringing the Joker back in the sequel, and in Joker there were I felt that it was the Batman character was shoehorned in a bit too much with featuring his I think Alfred's in it, right?
Alfred and his parents was
Yeah,
Wayne's parents, Bruce Wayne's parents, I should say. But
which I
they
didn't
still
think
had
added anything to. For me, it didn't add anything. I think so, but yeah, I think this film it just feels like there isn't that kind of burden of like this has to be connected to a wider thing.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they worked as like their own standalone thing, and they had like personality to them. But yeah, no, so like I said, as you said, yeah, it's another question mark of like this was able to do it 127 million, and Indiana Jones had to do it like 300 million. I get it, there's like more action set pieces, but like maybe you should like question yourself, like why do we need to put so much money into this?
And where's the
Unless it's
heart as well? Like
yeah,
that's what it does well because it connects and it has a heart as well. Which I think you could look at a film like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and there wasn't that, and that's probably there's many factors, but could be one of the reasons it didn't connect with an audience as much as I think people thought it would before it came out. And that's just the irony of this film is that it's simultaneously the grittiest, darkest um, X-Men film, but also the most heartfelt one and the most sentimental one.
hmm
It's an interesting like dichotomy there.
yeah, and it's you're right, and even there's other aspects to it that I really appreciated from Logan. Some of the attention to detail at times I thought was pretty good, like when Logan is driving off back to get Charles his medication and such. At the very beginning of the film, he he drives through I think it was custom borders, and driving out of the United States. And he says, the guy is like, "Hey Sam," and almost like, "Oh, okay, he's done that. He's known these guys before and such." And even the connections they do, like the subtle nods they bring to the film outside of like, "Hey, here's the X-Men comic book," but even also there's points in the film like if you saw in when Logan's bedroom when he's trying to take the claw out, you see the pus coming out of his hands. You see in the background for a brief moment, it was a sword
Mm-hmm.
hanging on the bed, and that was a sword that he had got from a soldier he had saved in the Wolverine. There's a
Mm-hmm.
whole flashback in that, and he was offered. He said, "Hey, you saved my life. Here's a sword I want to give to you." And I thought that was really nice. And even the Wolverine actually sets up Logan's death.
Okay.
It was uh, uh, Yukio, I think her name was. She was the redhead in the film,
Mm-hmm.
and she had told Logan at one point in the film that he was, that she could see like the future and so on, and she can only see like glimpses of it. And she saw him dying and laying on the ground, and he was holding his heart in his hand. And in reality, Mangold was trying to set that up as like the metaphor of Laura being his heart,
Mm-hmm.
which is a piece of him, and even Charles said they have your DNA from Alkali Lake as well, which is a throwback to
Oh,
his
okay.
origins. But it's things like that. It's like you wouldn't really
Mm-hmm.
notice it unless you had seen the other films,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're like a diehard like comic book enthusiast of like, oh, I know the reference. Oh, I know the reference. But it wasn't like, oh, see this reference we have here, dangle like keys in front of your face, audience. Um, so
But you
I
mentioned the
like that.
Wolverine. You mentioned the
Yeah, go ahead.
Wolverine, um, and which again I haven't seen, but
Mhm.
uh, it's interesting to me that Mangold did that film as well. But am I correct in thinking that it's quite a different style of film from this film?
It is. So the Wolverine is very much clearly a studio film. so to speak. I mean, this is a very is a studio feel film, but there's a little bit of an independence to it.
Hmm.
But the Wolverine feels very much like a studio summer blockbuster kind of movie. We want to get, asses in seats
Yeah.
and have popcorn go down their mouths. But it's like I'm pretty sure, I could be mistaken in this, but I think the Wolverine. Yep. Okay. The Wolverine was also co-written by Scott Frank,
Hmm.
who did this movie as well.
Yeah.
Had a hand in writing this, and Mark Bomback, who co-wrote the script with Scott Frank. I'm looking through here. Yeah, Mark Bomback has done Live Free or Die Hard, Unstoppable, the remake of Total Recall, the last two Planet of the Apes reboots he did. He had a hand in writing those. And it says here he was involved as a uncredited writer, or, uncredited like rewriter or something on 50 Shades of Grey and the Tom Cruise Mummy film.
Okay.
So, anyways, but yeah, if you ever do watch the Wolverine, I would recommend, if you could try to find a copy of it, the unrated, was it
Mhm.
the Unleashed extended edition?
Yeah.
Um, because it's a lot, even though there's like a lot more blood squibs, CG blood squibs added in. It's clearly, you could tell the film was shot as a PG-13,
Hmm.
and I'm sorry, it was shot as an R-rated film, but they had to edit it down to a PG-13.
Yeah.
But anyways, uh, so yeah, going back to Logan though, yeah, so it was, James Mangold, he directed that one, and like I said, they're completely different from each other. And even Michael McCusker, as I said, is back to doing this as an editor. And I didn't even he also won his Academy Award for Ford v Ferrari as well, if I'm not
That's right.
mistaken. And you could see some of his editing tricks that he would do on Ford v Ferrari in here as well. Some of it, at least, in the action set pieces. Like, there's a lot of like tension building, and he does a really good job with it. And I believe Faden Papa Michael. No, okay, he didn't. Okay, I could have sworn he shot this movie, but it was John Matheson who shot
Okay.
this, who did Gladiator and a couple other films. I'm looking through what else he did. Phantom of the Opera. And he's doing the next Gladiator too. The next Gladiator. Okay,
Okay.
interesting. Anyways, so yeah, so like a lot of like really well crafted technical crew involved.
It's a
Even the
great
sound.
production. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
what
Mangold's.
Mangold.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Mangold does that well. I think he's a great studio director, and he puts together a really solid, um, well done production. Usually, every time out.
Yeah, he definitely does.
Mm.
And even if I wasn't the biggest fan of Indiana Jones, I could at least say that he at least had a fair amount of talented crew members involved working on the project. And even a bad movie can have like really good technical work involved. Like we've
Absolutely.
we've seen that sometimes
Yeah.
from time
I've,
to time again.
yeah. No, I had the same feeling with Indiana Jones. It was very solid. You could tell there was a lot of craft behind it, but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't successful as I think. Just a satisfying Indiana Jones film that felt like a satisfying conclusion to the story. Yeah.
And speaking of CG effects, I wanted to ask if you knew during the chase sequence that they were in the limo, trying to outrun the guys, and they're trying to make it past the train. I just want to get back to that sequence real quick. Were you aware that some of those shots where he's driving Hugh Jackman was actually a CG double?
No,
Like
I had no.
they had his face replaced. So they had
Okay.
like a stunt guy driving and doing some of the dangerous stunts, like when the cars are bumping into him and such. And they had the, like dots around his face, and then they, sort of rotoscoped around his head and replaced it with a CG version of Hugh Jackman. I thought that was pretty interesting, and it's like very quick shots you could see of it. Like if you were to pause it on your Blu-ray or
Yeah,
copy of it, you could probably notice some of it at times.
I had no idea.
Um,
Couldn't tell.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
interesting, yeah, to see that. And the other thing I wanted to ask was, did you have an issue, because we're, I one of my issues I've always had with the film, and I've always had it since I saw the film, was when they brought in the X-24 clone. I'm
Mhm.
aware that it's not in the comics at all. I'm totally aware of that. But at the same time, for me personally, I understand the intention of what Mangold's trying to do. He's trying to show this is what Logan would have been like if he hadn't gone to the right people and sort of become the person that he's become, instead of like a caged animal like this character is. But I just wasn't the biggest fan of it being like a twin kind of thing. um I mean, I granted they could have done a lot worse with it, where they're like, oh no, he's me or I'm him or whatever, all that
Yeah.
bullshit, where it's like, which one do I shoot? We've
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
that done before, and it's like, okay, come on.
Yeah.
What was your what was your take on that?
It's something that I'd forgotten about when I rewatched it, that does happen in the film. Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I think maybe it does feel a little bit familiar in some way, and I can't even pinpoint what it is, but it feels like we have seen that kind of thing play out in a few times before. But it didn't bother me too much.
Okay.
I guess there is a sense that it does feel a little bit tacked on, but it doesn't really feel like it's used when it needs to be used, and I think in that big scene at the farm, and then to come back at the end. But it does feel a little bit just not really like it doesn't feel like it's very uh, it's not embellished enough. Like it's not developed enough as an idea. I don't think.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, like I said, I still stand by what I said though about
Hmm.
it's yeah, that's yeah, that's that. I'm looking through to see what other notes there was I had for the film. The other thing I wanted to say was in regard well, actually the one funny moment we had at the Thursday screening uh with Logan was, I remember I saw it with like it was like a packed house for like a Thursday night showing, and when we get to that scene where Logan decides to not take the money and he's gonna stay behind or whatever, and Laura's pissed at him for not even tagging along and whatnot. And I thought it was funny when he says like wherever I go, bad shit happens. You know, whoever I go with, bad shit happens with them. And she said something like, "Then I'll be fine." And when
Hmm.
when that scene happened in the theaters, there was an audience member in there saying like, "Ooh,"
Hmm.
and my buddy and I, we just started snickering like, "What the fuck was that?" um, so I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah, and I'm looking through. Do you have any other notes you wanted to share while I'm searching through my stuff?
Well, I don't know if you wanted. I mean, I'll just touch on. I think the strongest, if you want to talk about allusions to other films, the strongest link to Unforgiven is, I think, uh, the talk that Wolverine and Laura have, where it's about kind of feeling guilt for what you've done in the past, which is a strong theme in Unforgiven. And
Hmm.
again, I felt that was a very interesting concept to bring into the superhero genre, because it isn't really discussed that ultimately, even good or bad, you are in this case killing people, and
Yep.
the 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 weight that has on you. And I think it was a nice another new touch. I think this film brings, like, this film brings a lot of new things to this genre, and that's another one where I think the baggage of your actions was an interesting concept, and again, very linked to Unforgiven there, which you can see the influence in that particular scene, especially.
Yeah, and even with the
Mm.
family on the farm, that's very much it's very much shown of that feeling of guilt of like your past is going to come up and haunt you, and
Mm.
that causes the problem, and destroys this whole peaceful family with like a single kid, and his parents were just brutally murdered.
It's
You know,
shocking, actually, just how brutal the film is, especially in that scene. Like, that they don't really hold back. It's
yeah.
such a sweet scene. Like, the dinner scene is such a great sweet scene, and it's quickly followed by the carnage after that. It's like, okay, this is doing some pretty dark stuff as well.
Yeah, the only kind of things I had for notes though this time around was just really like some of the technical stuff. Like
Hmm.
the one thing I read, and I'm not even sure if this is accurate. So if someone out there could, you know, tell me if I'm wrong, then I'll own up to this. But apparently during the casino scenes where Laura had to, they're walking through the casino for the first time. They used because of Daphne Keene not being of age to walk on the casino floors, they had to use a body double for
Huh.
some of those
Okay.
shots. And whenever they showed her face, it's in front of a green screen, so to speak,
Really?
or whatever it is, like a projector. And I noticed some of that, especially when she was walking up towards the glass case. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
that very much looks like a green screen there. I see what you're doing,
Okay.
Mangold.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still convincing enough. Like, you're
Mm.
not thinking to yourself, oh, okay, the whole time they're in front of a green screen.
Hmm.
But it was interesting to see that, and yeah, so that was cool. And
Did you want to talk
uh,
about? I guess I sort of thought maybe performances. If you wanted to touch on that at
yeah,
all.
sure, yeah, go ahead. Any performances for you that stood out for the film?
Um, I loved Patrick Stewart's performance in this film. I thought he was great, and you can tell it's an actor who I think probably initially signed on to X Men not with the foresight to think that it will lead to like a really great three-dimensional portrayal of this character. I think he's great in X Men, but it is sort of there isn't a great deal of depth, or at least as much as we get to see in this film. And I think you can
Hmm.
see that he's relishing the opportunity to play this character, but in this very kind of postmodern sense of where you're seeing the real human angle behind it. And I think it's one of those great things that some franchises can do where the characters do evolve and you get to see a side that I guess I'm sure they didn't even think about when they first cast you in the role.
Yeah, and it helps. I think what also helps too with some of these comic book films to stand out a bit much is you get Shakespeare like actors, or as in his case, he became a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1966, I believe, and did A Midsummer's Night Dream, which was written by Shakespeare. And so it helps that you have actors like him who have done stage work and Broadway such stuff. Yeah, can't talk today. And even Hugh Jackman's another one who did, I think, a version of Oklahoma on the stage, and is a very talented singer.
Mm.
And you see him do play the Wolverine character, and he's pretty good too. Even in this outing, it might be one of my favorite performances of him.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the more I think about it, because I can't think of another dramatic work he's done that was like showcasing his range as an actor. And
Uh,
the one, go ahead,
I
sorry.
think Bad Education he was great in that. If you got to see that, that was I think
I
his
did,
strongest.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I rarely watch made for straight to TV movies, but that was pretty good. I had enough people
Mm.
recommend it to me. I'm like, I'm gonna watch this. And yeah, he was pretty good in that. The one scene that I did want to say though with Hugh Jackman, I thought really showcased his strength as an actor, was the moment when he's burying Charles. For now, it's the second
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
And what I find, what I didn't find it hilarious per se, but I found it very ironic, not really ironic more, but more sad, that if you, as somebody who's seen all the X-Men films, and you look at where we've gone, and Logan has essentially gone through the whole thing and has time traveled and so on and so forth, and he remembers his past, and even witnessed Charles dying in X-Men 3 The Last Stand, and all the X-Men people are there. Everyone is there, at least those within the mansion that are alive. And now we're at a point where the only person is there is him and Laura, his like
Mm.
biological daughter. And I always find that to be a very sad but a very heartbreaking moment. Like, whoever came up with that idea in of itself is like, wow, that was really smart on you guys. It wasn't just, oh, it's just him bearing a best friend of his. It's someone it was practically a father figure for him,
Hmm.
and was the one who showed him the path, to be, to where he is now, and having to witness his death twice,
Yeah.
is heartbreaking.
I think that's a great
So
scene, and it really showcases his performance, as you said. And I think that's just a testament as well to the writing. And I think a scene like that, it's developed a lot more than I think it could have been in like a superhero film. That the touch, like that he's near the water and stuff and that kind of thing. And
mhm.
it's very touching. Like what else can you say? It's just I think all the characters do feel quite connected to, and there are real emotional stakes in the film. So like I think Stephen Merchant, I really thought he was really good in the film, and
Mhm.
you feel for the character, like with limited screen time at the start. Like he's in the film, but when he does get kidnapped, like you don't want to see anything happen to this guy, Um, so I think it just does a great job of feeling connected, and that there are stakes in a way that a lot of superhero films you don't, because it does feel like nothing really matters, that no one's going to die, everyone's going to come back, and this feels like it's genuinely
They're going to save the world,
yeah, yeah,
like that was a fake out, so and so
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
die, things like that. No, I agree with you on that. And even with there's also a fair amount of callback. It was a pay,
Mm,
was it setup and payoff that we called it in screenwriting class,
yeah, true.
where like when the was it Boyd Holbrook, who's in the film as well, and he says, beware of the light, and then
Mm,
he cuts open the cloth, and
yeah.
Caliban, who's the Stephen Merchant character, his weakness is light. He can't get anywhere near the sun, otherwise he'll just burn up in a crisp. And that's paid back later on the film when he grabs the grenades off the side right as they're gearing up to help the Richard E. Grant character take X-24 down, or at least get him in a peaceful state. And he pulls the pins, and beware of the light, and he blows them. And he sacrifices himself to kill them. And yeah, no, I thought that was pretty interesting too. And even with the Shane thing, with like the monologue that comes back into the end bit, I thought that was great. Um,
Did you like how
yeah,
the kind of climactic scene, and there's a callback to Richard E. Grant's character, where his father, I think, was like one of the
scientist.
scientists, and then he's kind of giving the classic spiel, where it's everything's laid out and this is what's happening, and then like
Yeah,
out of nowhere he just gets shot, and I think that's again like a nice like twist on the classic kind of what you would normally see, where you get like the villain's big grand speech, and there
yeah,
isn't
like
like a showdown. It's just he just gets shot straight away. It's pretty,
yeah,
and it's pretty
yeah. That
satisfying. Yeah.
it was. I will say it was pretty cool. Oh, that was funny, and the one line I did like was when Logan says, "Yeah, the asshole will put this this animanium in me." He's like, "Yeah, I think he might have," and he said,
Mm.
"Yeah, I think I might have killed him," and he's like,
Yeah,
"I'm
yeah.
sure you have,"
I
and I
think
thought that was a great line.
that got a good response. I think when I saw this, yeah, with the crowd
Theater.
in the cinema. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I got to say, is that I know that Richard E. Grant has been around for decades. I'm well aware of that. He was in like Age of Innocence. I think he might have been in. I definitely know he was in The Player.
Hmm.
It's a 92 film, I think it was,
Yeah.
and but it was funny to see him in Logan. I think that might have been the first thing I'd seen him in, and then the next year he does Can You Ever Forgive Me, and he gets nominated
Mm.
for an Oscar, and now he's in like Saltburn,
Yeah,
and I'm like, good for you, Richard E. Grant. I'm really glad for your career, and he's a very talented actor too. Like I've seen him in a couple of things, and I'm like, yeah, he's good. I like him.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking through, see what else there is. I mean, I also want to say too, while we're speaking of action movies, and I think this is the first action film we've talked on the podcast. I also want to give props to all the professionals and stunt performers on this film, because they probably did a hell of a job working on this, especially whoever doubled for the father of the farmhouse who had to fall down the steps. I
Mm.
know there, he might have been padded and so on. He probably had like a pad laid out down on the ground that we didn't see in camera, but that thing's still a bitch. And I've fallen down those steps, that those kind of steps before, and even ended up breaking my arm that
Oh,
way.
ouch.
And it's not good.
No,
But
no.
all I will say is that I commend you stunt performers for taking the risk, and because that's really dangerous. No matter, even
Yeah,
if it is like a simple stunt for you, it's like that really could, some of these stunts can kill you.
and the
And
drivers that there's a lot of car stuff and
yes,
stunts as well.
oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of car stuff, and even some of the CG work is still, it holds up fairly well. Like I'm pretty sure most of the automated trucks that we saw on the highway in
Yeah,
Logan,
I noticed
I'm
that.
pretty sure most of that is CG.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Um,
Especially because they have
especially
to
with, go
cut
ahead.
between the horses and stuff. You couldn't really choreograph that with real trucks. So I did notice that, but it was pretty seamless. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And if anyone gets a chance, I think I might link it in the description if I find the some of the examples. I'd encourage audience members, if you ever get a chance to, when you're watching some of your films, maybe every once in a while, I would recommend looking up some of these visual effects showcases, or like, behind the scenes reels, because they really show layer by layer how long like what kind of work had to go into this. And if you pause in each frame, you'll see how much detail went into it. Because there are a lot of these films, even like the latest Avatar film, where I'm like, wow, that was
mm.
stunning. Like how they did some of that. And Corridor Crew does a pretty good job going over some of the behind the scenes visual effects stuff, and even stunt work as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And David Fincher always has like very invisible visual effects where you watch the reels and you go, I had no idea that building wasn't a real building. Like just things that you don't think of as CGI in a film. Um,
yeah. Or
yeah,
like, how did they make a convincing CG double for Army Hammer and The Social Network?
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, that kind of shit's always nuts to me. I'm looking through to see if there's anything else I had. Um, the yeah, again, not a whole lot I had to say for this viewing, because like I said, like I'd seen it multiple times, and this one's a kind of a passive experience for me. The other thing, there is actually one other note I'll say, and then I'll let you give the final word on the film itself, if that's all right. I really like the final shot of the movie where
Yes.
Laura turns the cross to an X. I thought
Hmm.
that was a nice shot,
Yeah.
and whoever's idea it was for that, good job.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
And you could
like I
almost see
said,
them
just
doing something where is like the grave is it like it's going to start moving, like is the rubble on the grave going to start moving, like you kind of think like is there going to be some hint that he's not actually dead, but no, he is, and
yeah,
they committed to it. Yeah.
like Batman v Superman did with the rubble on Superman's grave.
Yeah.
Spoilers, by the way, for like an almost 10-year movie. But yeah, no. So, anyways, yeah, I'll let you get the final word, and then we'll veer a little bit into our awards conversation with this film.
Sure. I think it's just a solid studio action film, and it doesn't even necessarily I feel like a superhero film. Like you just say, it's a solid, um, yeah, like R-rated action film. But also, I think there is a lot more depth to it,
Mm-hmm.
and you do feel a connection to the characters. I think the performances are all around great. There are so many great moments and great little scenes that I felt were very well constructed and well written, and I think it's just an example of what can be done. I think when you take a franchise and you don't, you're not necessarily trying to then think of ways to have, expand it into multiple spin-offs and sequels and series. It just feels like it's its own contained, really solid film with um, yeah, with great all around um, production, crew, and performances.
Yeah, as someone who has, I was definitely sucked into the superhero genre a bit. Definitely growing up in the like late, mid to late 2010 era. I Yeah, this was definitely a breath of fresh air for sure, and I find it very funny that it came just right in time before the comic book stuff was like, okay, we're done with this. I think it was around like Endgame 2 years after this, where Avengers Endgame, where it's like, okay, yeah, we're kind of done with this. Do you
Mm,
have anything new to add? No. Okay, we're just not gonna go see these movies.
yeah. Well, it's a funny
Because
time to
we're kind
talk about this film in that it is coming at a time right now that it feels like it is winding down. Like, and we're almost talking about pretty much the pinnacle of around this time of what superhero movies will be.
of,
And it seems to be now that we're at the end of that. So interesting time to be discussing this film.
Yeah, and especially with the Marvels tanking at the box office the last time I
Yeah,
checked, and
yeah.
I've been hearing that they're gonna try to get the X-Men rebooted and into this MCU, but we'll see how that turns out. Like I said, Deadpool 3 is coming out next summer, I think, as of this recording. For all
Hmm.
we know, they could change it again to be like 2025 it's going to be out by. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm not really looking forward to Deadpool 3 because of who's involved as a director. I'm not the biggest fan of, but I don't know. I was pleasantly surprised by the first two Deadpool films, and I went into those thinking like, all right, we'll see what happens. Let's roll the die. But we'll see. I mean, the last time we had a writer's strike on an X-Men production, and it caused a bit of problems with, as I mentioned, Origins Wolverine, and that did not turn out as well as we thought it was going to be, or at least I thought it was going to be.
And something tells me
Yeah,
that this new Deadpool film, that we won't be getting this version of Wolverine in the film.
yeah. I mean, they did hint that they are going to try to connect this with Logan, but they're not going to fuck it up with like how it ends, from what I'm told. So for all we
Okay.
know, maybe it is, but I don't know. I just don't know what they're gonna do with Deadpool 3. I guess we'll have to see we'll have to see what happens, but yeah. Um so regarding with award stuff, we already talked about adapted screenplay, how this was such a barren field to where even some of the like potential Oscar baity films couldn't even get in, like the Last Flag Flying, I think was another Flying Flag, I think it was the
Hmm.
Richard Linklater film with Steve Carell and Lawrence Fishburne. That couldn't get in for any awards attention. Thank You for Your Service was nowhere near any kind of awards contender because it flopped to the box office and no one saw it. And the other nominees that year outside of Call Me by Your Name was The Disaster Artist, Molly's Game, which we will be talking about those two films in the future, and Mudbound. Um, and I'm just looking through here to see, because I'm curious to see what else it could have gotten in for. And Logan, that is. I could be mistaken, but I'm not too sure if it was eligible for the Visual Effects Award. Yeah, no, it wasn't eligible. Okay, interesting. Yeah, it did make the short list, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's interesting. Um, yeah, because some of the films, yeah, they managed to get Star Wars in. They got Planet of the Apes. They got Blade Runner, Guardians 2, and Kong Skull Island. Dunkirk was pretty close to getting for visual effects.
Yeah, kind of surprising in
Yeah.
a way that it didn't. Um,
And with the sound team behind Logan, especially with Paul, I think it was Paul Massey, who would go on. I'm looking
did he
through.
win
See what else
for?
there
Oh
was.
no. Okay.
Yeah, Paul Massey
Mm.
won for Bohemian Rhapsody. I can't believe I brought that up, but there we go. Um, yeah, Paul Massey was involved as a sound mixer on the film. He did reteam with Mangold to do Ford v Ferrari at the barest minimum, which that was a really well mixed and well
An Oscar-winning
sound effects
sound
edited
editing.
film.
I don't
Yep,
know if the same sound editor did Logan, that did Ford v Ferrari, but I'm just looking now.
Donald Sylvester
Yes,
did.
it
Yep,
was the same. Okay, so that
yeah,
I definitely could see this getting into sound editing because they usually that is a category that when it was around would get those sort of stray nominations. I'm thinking of like I remember Drive and All Is
Sully.
Lost and Sully and Sicario, like certain films that would show up there that wouldn't show up in many other places. So
Sicario admittedly did make sense because it got in for score and
that's
cinematography.
true.
But something like Sully got in because of, or it's like a name director kind of thing where it's like we like the director, and um, yeah. So yeah. I'm trying
And
to
then
think if there's anything else.
what
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
supporting actor? Because I know that Stewart did get some precursors as well. I think he
I'm
got the
looking
Critics' Choice
through. He got nominated for
nominated.
Critics' Choice of the main precursors. That was
Mm.
it. There's like Los Angeles Online, Detroit, Houston, North Carolina, North Texas, Phoenix, and Seattle. He got nominations for there, but he was never. I don't think he was as close of
No.
a supporting actor nominee. Maybe someone like Michael Stuhlbarg or Armie Hammer. Um,
Yes.
but I'm not sure if they were
I don't
gonna
think he was
get him
close,
in.
but I think it would have been a good nomination
Yeah,
nonetheless.
and I'm looking through here, and I keep forgetting that was the year that Christopher Plummer
Mm.
had all the money in the world. I haven't finished the movie yet. I saw like 20 minutes of it, I think, or maybe like close to an hour. But from what I did see of all the money in the world, I thought Plummer was definitely fantastic, and it
Hmm.
shocks me that he only had like 7 days worth of work because, in case anyone isn't aware, he was it Kevin the whole Kevin Spacey news came out and they wanted to replace him, and instead of delaying the film for another year, they said screw it, we're going to hire Christopher Plummer to recast him and do all of his scenes, and they did it in like a full week, I think, and they even got some of the major players back in to do some scenes with Plummer, and it's shocking that they were able to do that quick of a turnaround on that, and Plummer, did as well as he could, and he
It's
got in for the lineup,
it's
which is
pretty
impressive.
amazing. Like and it is a really good performance actually. And just as you said, the fact that I think it was literally, it could have been 3 weeks before it was seen. Like it was so soon to
Mhm.
when it came out. It was unheard of and pretty seamless. Like you wouldn't really know if you watch the film that they would have finished shooting this a couple of weeks before. Like it's pretty
Well,
amazing.
I was gonna say there's at least like two shots. There's one with they had to use a shot of Kevin Spacey's version coming out of the train. They had to use, and there's one where Plumber's in an obvious green screen that I was like, yeah, that's pretty, that was pretty obvious. But outside of that, yeah, no, I from what I saw, I was like, that's pretty
Yeah.
seamless. Um, and then the other nominees that year, Woody Harrelson was going to get in because of the Best Picture potential that had Three Billboards. Richard Jenkins was going to happen. Willem Dafoe was definitely in because I
Mm.
think he led the critics groups that year and was the critics' favorite. And then Rockwell was going to get in because he ended up being the front runner for that
Hmm.
film.
I just think
So
there wasn't a lot of room, yeah, for Patrick Stewart, and also coming out in March, it probably wasn't top of mind, but
yeah, that's the other thing I also want to remind audiences too is that just because a movie comes out in March, not everything is going to be in everything everywhere all at once. That may be our last film for a while that gained that much momentum and got 3 acting wins and picture. So, you know, yeah, so it just depends on what it is, like most of the best picture and especially the acting winners are around the fall season. This year we might get a little bit of a change up with picture this year. We'll have to see how Oppenheimer does, but I'm fairly confident that outside of maybe one or two of the acting categories, most of them will come from films that hit the fall festival run or came around Christmas time. So yeah, so we'll have to see how that turns out. But yeah, for the most part, it's as you said, it's always tough for a movie to come out in like earlier in the first quarter of the year and then try to gain momentum to that Oscar nomination or win. Because I even The Big Sick was one that came out in like that premiered at Sundance, and it kept the momentum going all throughout the summer as
yeah.
to like it's going to get in for a screenplay nomination at least, and
Mm.
at least that's what Joey Magnuson had told me back a while ago. God, it seems like forever since we recorded that episode. Yeah, so like I said, I'm trying to even think if there's any other like Oscar potential this could have had outside of the categories we already discussed,
Mm.
because production design wasn't really going to happen.
It did actually, interestingly, it won the Production Design Guild for Contemporary Design, which I
Yeah,
found interesting, but obviously wasn't going to happen at the Oscars.
yeah.
And then I guess you have like editing, cinematography, these things that maybe if it was like a bigger contender, if it was like a Top Gun Maverick kind of film, could have maybe made it in, but I just don't think there was that level of enthusiasm at the time.
Well, and I'm looking through even just the sound mixing. I'm looking through, yeah, sound mixing. Yeah, we already discussed that. I'm
I
looking
mean, makeup and
through.
hairstyling, there's some pretty impressive.
Was it eligible?
It wasn't in the short list, but
Okay.
I think to be honest, like just the injury detail is pretty well done in this film.
hmm Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, editing could have been tough
Yeah, it's a
because
tough.
and and Baby Driver managed to get in for editing because of the momentum paying off. And then I,
It's
Tonya almost became a Best Picture nominee.
it's tough to get into editing if you're not a top kind of Best Picture contender, which is interesting though that this year we had 2 films that weren't nominated for Best Picture in editing. I feel like that doesn't happen very often at all.
Well, even looking at a couple years ago, Tick Tick Boom made it in
True.
for editing, and I think what also helped that film out was that Tick Tick Boom was probably the likeliest to win the comedy musical category to begin with
Mm.
over Don't Look Up and what was the other one that year? It might have been just Don't Look Up that year. Okay, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. So yeah, because they weren't going to give that anything.
Mm-hmm.
Except the writers. The writers were willing to say, nope, we like to stick our nose and thumbs into this, janky, flawed, satirical of a film, even though it's not really that great of a satirical film, or even a funny comedy. Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. uh, yeah, I'm just looking through to see what else there was. Oh, and the other thing I want to point out, yes, lead actor was tough. There was no way Hugh Jackman was ever going to make it in, not just for that, but also for The Greatest Showman, because he had lost the Golden Globe comedy category to James Franco, who was
Mm.
likely the sixth spot, who just
Yeah.
couldn't
Last
get in.
minute kind of didn't make it. Um,
Yeah.
but a good year for Hugh Jackman, just in terms of, I guess, at least commercial success. He had 2 of the biggest films that year that he was the lead of. So good year
Yeah.
for him.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, like I said, it just I can't really think of much else outside of those categories they could have been eligible for. Or and I didn't even ask. Obviously, I'd assume your answer, but I'd assume you would agree that this is a deserving like lone screenplay nomination for the film.
I think so. I think it's definitely deserving. I think it's a. I think that the screenplay awards, in many ways, and this goes to the nominees. I think it's a reflection of, as much as you like to think it's for the writing. I do think it's a reflection of how did the voters feel about the overall film, and how did the writers branch feel about the films that year. And I think that they typically just reflect what were the strongest films, and obviously writing is the backbone for all of that. So I think it doesn't jump out maybe as like a great film. I think when you start to look at it and like take it apart, like it's you start to see the inventiveness. And I think the one of the reasons the writers did respond to it so much. I mean, you mentioned Scott Frank definitely, but I think the fact that it does feel fresh, and it does feel like a new take on this. It doesn't feel rote or like we're going over similar ground. So I think it is the inventiveness of the film that is ultimately what helped it get nominated. Aside from just that it's overall, I think in like for most people it would have been probably one of a lot of people it would have been one of the highlights of that year. I think as a film for many people, not everyone, but a lot of people. I think it was one of the most solid, well put together films that year. And I think
Oh,
I don't think looking at who else was in contention, I'm not sure. I wouldn't really move anything uh, in to replace Logan. Maybe like something else I would replace. But Logan, I think there's nothing else that I could see as being left out that would have been more deserving.
yeah, it's a solid lineup. I'm not the biggest fan of Mudbound. I saw it once and I hated it. Yeah, I had a couple people like be like shame, when I was in film school, and they're like, really, you didn't like Mudbound? I'm like, nope, not a fan of it. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it was I
that's a
guess
discussion. Go ahead.
the first Netflix major contender. I think was
For the above the line categories, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Um,
maybe not a film that is overly. I think today overly discussed. It seems to have kind of, as many Netflix films tend to do, hasn't really stuck around in the consciousness, public
yeah,
consciousness.
there's a few. There's a few from Netflix that has stayed in the minds for
Yeah.
better or for worse. Roma's one. The Irishman's
Yeah.
still around. Marriage Story, people are still making memes about.
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Like
think what else
Power
there
of the
was.
Dog.
Power of the Dog's another one. Don't
Um,
Look Up, unfortunately.
yeah.
Uh, and All Quiet on the Western Front for its infamous score
True.
win.
Yeah.
Uh, and I have a feeling we'll have to see how this season turns out, but I have a feeling Maestro might be talked about for better or for worse.
I think so. Yeah.
Because I have some thoughts on it, but I'll share that for another time for some other podcast, or it's something down the road, but we'll see. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I had to say about the movie. We're kind of like over our usual time limit anyways, so I think we're just gonna wrap up right now. So I just want to say, Riley, thank you again for dedicating your time and being up at this early hour. I assume right now in Australia it's like 8:37 in the morning
Yeah.
as we're recording.
It's early,
Okay,
so I'm not as sharp as I might be, but I've really enjoyed it. So it's been good.
awesome. Well, like I said, just thank you again for being here on the show. Before we sign off, is there anything you would like to plug in to our listeners and followers for where they could follow you along?
Yeah, mainly just my letterboxed. So my letterboxed is RJ1994. Just all one word.
Gotcha. And all lowercase, right?
Actually uppercase.
Oh, all uppercase. Okay,
Yeah.
you heard that here, folks.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So as for me, you could follow me and the show through Linktree under at Matthew995, where you can follow along on all my social media accounts such as Twitter and Letterboxd. On the same site, I've also provided a link for where you can listen to more episodes of the show. And if you're interested in being on the hot seat, let me know, and hopefully we can arrange that happening in the near future. In the meantime, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and we hope to see you at the movies. Take care, guys.